everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation, an Indigenous and Zen perspective on living into a world beyond crisis with Norma Wong and Sonya Shah. I'm Izzy Angus. I am the Public Events Manager for California Institute of Integral Studies, which is a nonprofit university in San Francisco. To start, as a representative of CIIS, I want to honor and acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlone people, who are the original peoples and continual caretakers of the San Francisco Peninsula. CIIS's campus is currently located on the unceded ancestral lands of the Ramaytush Ohlone, or Yalamu, which is the Ramaytush word that identifies both the people and the territory. We're gathered in this online space, but we're tuning in from all over the world, and we're all rooted in the land where we live and work. So we must honor the Indigenous stewards and continual caretakers of the lands that we call home. If you're early in your journey and would like to learn more about Native lands, languages, territories, and support organizations local to your area, we recommend the website native-land.ca as a starting point. And you can find that link in the event description below this video. Now, before we start, I want to go over a few general tips and troubleshooting items for this online event. We will have a Q&A after the conversation tonight, and you can submit your questions at any time during this event using our anonymous web form, which is linked in the event description below this video. Our presenters will pull questions from that form after the conversation, and we'll try to get to as many as we have time for. We have automatically generated captions for this event, which you can toggle on and off using the closed captioning button in YouTube. Chat is enabled during this event, but please note that it is not being moderated and our presenters cannot see the chat. Chat is by no means required to fully experience the event, but if you'd like to participate in chat, please be respectful and avoid language that could be offensive or insensitive to others. You can turn the chat off at any time, and we definitely encourage you to do so if you find that it is negatively impacting your experience of the event in any way. If you're having issues with your audio or video, we always suggest that you start by refreshing the page, and then if you still have issues, try adjusting your video settings from within YouTube. Now, let me introduce our presenters, and then we'll get right to the conversation. Sonya Shah initiated the Ahimsa Collective in 2016. She is also an associate professor at California Institute of Integral Studies. Central to her core values are nurturing community belonging and collective care, healing, compassion, love, and transforming harm. She is a first-generation immigrant from the northwestern part of India and feels most at home in nature. She has two amazing children who remind her what it means to be in love all the time, and currently resides in Northern California. Norma Wong is a native Hawaiian and Hakka lifelong resident of Hawaii. She is the abbot of Anko-in, an independent branch temple of Daihonzan Chozenji, and serves practice communities in Hawaii, across the US, and in Toronto, Canada. She's an 86th generation Zen master, having trained at Chozenji for over 40 years. In earlier years, Wong served as a Hawaii state legislator and on the policy and strategy team for Governor John Waihee. Norma has spent many years in the applied space, the direct application of Indigenous and Zen ways, values, and practices to living and transformational change critical to our times. Norma is part of the Collective Acceleration Community of Practice. And now it is my absolute pleasure to turn it over to Sonya and Norma.
Well, we're really excited to be here today. My name is Sonya Shah, and I'm here with Norma Wong, and we're really excited to talk about this amazingly beautiful book by this incredible elder and person, When No Things Work. And before we get into a little bit more of a contextual introduction, I think Norma was going to start with some poem.
Aloha, Sonia. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so glad to be in conversation with you this evening. I have two poems that I'd like to share. One is by a legendary poet from about the year 700 in that region that we now call China. Legendary in that it may have been one person, or it might actually have been a group of poets who wrote as one person. Han Shan. If you're always silent and say nothing, what stories will the younger generation have to tell? If you hide yourself away in the thickest woods, how will your wisdom's light shine through? A bag of bones is not a sturdy vessel. The wind and frost do their work soon enough. Plow a stone field with a clay ox, and the harvest day will never come. The second poem is more modern, and you may have heard this one. It's also known as a Celtic prayer of approach. I honor your gods. I drink at your well. I bring an undefended heart to our meeting place. I have no cherished outcomes. I will not negotiate by withholding. I am not subject to disappointment. This I pledge to you, Sonya.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And what a beautiful way to start. Yeah, thank you for that. Norma and I were talking, we talked once before this conversation, and I think in both the cultures that we come from, that we don't start anything without a proper introduction of who we are because we don't exist outside of the context and love and joy and labor of our ancestors and our environment and all of our relatives and how we got here, who we owe it to, who we love. So with that, I'm gonna ask Norma if she will introduce herself, and then I'll introduce myself too.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, I'm known familiarly as Norma Wong, although there are more names within my name. That is just a familiar name that I have. I am calling today from the place that I live and which for at least 3 generations we have lived, which is in a valley known as Kalihi on the island of Oahu in the Hawaiian Islands. My ancestors are both the native people of this place, the Kanaka Maoli, the native Hawaiians, as well as Hakka. And the Hakka came from that place that we now call China as contract workers to work in the plantations. And in my case, those ancestors came sometime in the early or the mid 1800s is basically when they came to this place. The Hakka are nomadic people. They essentially refuse the homogenization into any place or any flag. And to this day, they will travel great lengths, hundreds and thousands, and even sometimes tens of thousands of miles within their lifetime, and their peoples may take several generations to return to the same place. So those are my peoples. I am so glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm known as Sonya Shah, and I have no other names. I have a 9-letter name. It's so sometimes I feel like I got gypped and want 7 other names in my name. But I was born in India. My parents are from the northwestern part of India, from Gujarat. All of my ancestors are. Um, and we immigrated to the US when I was a very small baby, and I grew up in New York and now currently live in California with my partner and my 2 wonderful children and my dog and many other beautiful beings that are around me. So that's a little bit about who I am. So maybe we can kind of get into the book, and get into, you wrote this really beautiful piece of work And I think maybe before I ask you about the framework of the book and the book itself, is I wanted to ask you a little bit about the process of writing, because you said in the beginning that you were sort of prompted to do this by your students, and that it's a big shift to move from the oral to the written. And I've seen, actually, I'm curious about it because I've seen other elders do the same thing. And so I wanted to ask you about your choice to write, and also what was it like to actually write this book?
Yes, well, it took literally 2 years. And, there were various people who spoke with me, but the one persistent instigator who I credit with this is Taj James, who some of your listeners may know of. And, he used every method that he could. And then he eventually had a somber conversation with me, which is all of the traditional methods that I would have come from, the long many generations, have counted on the passing of knowledge from one person to another, to be a person who's actually in front of you. And they would take a long time, and it'd be more of an apprenticeship than anything else. And that this would be the way. And this would be the way that uh, you would know that it isn't just about the exchange of information, that it was a deeper learning that would be going on. And his question to me, which he knew I would be susceptible to, is that if I understand this moment as being a time, place of collapse, then will I be able to put myself in front of enough people long enough for there to be enough people who may be able to do something about it? And in this case, I know that he wasn't only talking about me. So he's talking about any elder. Right? Would any elder be able to do that at this moment? And really the answer is no. So even in the accelerated way in which I teach, in which is controversial, and in my lineage, right? It's controversial in my lineage. So even in that accelerated way, that if I could not make the leap of faith, that even if this were being passed to someone that I may never meet, that it would land appropriately and be used appropriately. And whatever risk there may be in that regard, it is a risk that must be taken at this moment. So.
I really appreciate that. And the sort of, the faith of the unknown. And there was a line that you wrote in, and so I leap into the faith that something offered in the tangible realm of the written word will be received in the intangible spaces of sincere inquiry by persons I have not met and will and likely never be with across time space, which is kind of like this room, because you and I are the only two people who can see each other, but there's some people listening, and it matters and it's meaningful. And so, we are humbled by you taking that leap of faith in this time, which kind of leads me to that real big question. So, we are 2 days out from a very big inauguration in the United States that came with 150 proclamations and 150 pardons, and that feeling of collapse, I think, feels very real and palpable right now, as it does ebbs and flows in like the way the day does or the week does. So, in the first part of your book, you spent a lot of time talking about the collapse. So I'm wondering, what I took away from looking at the framework of your book is you're asking us to, in the urgency of all of the crisis and collapse is to stay focused on the long game, what you call the far horizon. Maybe I'd call it the North Star also. So I'm hoping you can really, for this beautiful audience that you and I cannot see into the universe, talk a little bit about this framework.
So, it's a framework that, uh, and hopefully I didn't infer with respect to what that framework is in too obtuse a way, because which is to say that I think of that framework really as being an indigenous one. Indigenous in not in a political or even a cultural sense, but an indigenous one with respect to that which all people who are on this call and all people who are not on this call once were, which is to say all our peoples were at some time in history, written and unwritten history, that we lived indigenous lives, right? We lived in smaller bands of people, and because we believed, all of our peoples believed, that we were the people, right? We were the people. In other words, they were in isolation of each other.
Mm-hmm.
That we lived essentially in relationship to each other and to the place and to the non-human beings. That would be the only way in which you would be able to actually to face challenges and to thrive and to create and to do all of those things that peoples might do. And you would have gone for thousands of years, some for tens of thousands of years, in that particular state of beingness. And then your indigeneity would have been interrupted. And so people who are indigenous today would say they're indigenous only because their indigeneity was interrupted recently. And so then they could effectively claim a different and jarring state of being that jarringness is that their worldview is so different than a worldview that is not indigenous. And a big difference, really big difference, besides the connectivity of humans with the earth and with non-human beings, is this notion that time space is not only about the present, that time space is the present as it reveals itself as informed by your ancestors and by the responsibility of making sure that the descendants that are not yet born are the ones who will be in a place that is of your making in your present. And so that immense notion of stewardship would be something that would be held by all the peoples, not just the leaders, not just the seers, not just the holy people, right? Not just by the elders. That would be just a worldview. That would be how you would think nature is, right? And so this what I am and others, I am not alone in this notion, is that there is a wisdom that is still there that is required in modern times if we are to get through this difficult moment. And by we, I mean not people of our own identity or ideology, but if humans are to get through this difficult moment, which may last decades, may last more than 100 years. If we're to get through this, then we have to relearn the muscle of that wisdom and to bring it into practical action, not just a belief system or a theory or an analysis. So
Oh, that's so beautiful. Um, it's always really wonderful to read what people write and then hear them talk about it. I'm having my own experience of thinking about your words and pondering your words and then hearing your words. One thing as you talk about that muscle, and remembering, that wisdom of our indigeneity, something that I know that I remember of my own, let's say, indigeneity is that I come from a very collectivist culture. We do everything together. We share all our meals. We always think about what the other person's doing. And I grew up thinking a lot about the multi-generational mutuality, the interdependence that you name, so that when I get lost and I feel selfish or I question my motives, because I get selfish and sometimes I have bad motives, it just takes me a little bit to remember who I am. And I have some memory because I grew up like that with my family, where I can remember, oh, actually, that's not who you are. That's not what you really believe. That's not who you want to be in the world. And I wonder for people that might not have had the privilege or the luck to grow up in that kind of collectivist culture or have been ripped from their ancestors, have had to live a different way. How do you teach that muscle? How do you teach people to have the thing that we need to get through the thing that we need to get through in the collapse?
Yes, so there's a lot of interruption that has to occur, right? Uh, you know, a, a practice pathway that I have is the Zen tradition, right? Buddhist tradition. In the Buddhist tradition, there's the three pillars, right? There's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And and they say Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, the Sangha, the Sangha, which is to say that it doesn't matter what kind of inner self you believe that you are cultivating, the Buddha part, the lessons that you're learning, the Dharma part. If you are not practicing that in community, the Sangha part, then among other things, you will have no notion of what it is you're practicing for. Right? You are, what my teacher would be called a garden stone Buddha.
Mm.
Might as well go and buy that sculpture from the garden shop and, and put it in the corner of your room, because your practice is not going to be any better than that. Right?
Mhm.
So it is this part about if it is the individualistic aspects of modern life tied to a device, which is you replace every several years, and in which you isolate yourself into what you think is hyperconnectivity, right? But is not even a person,
Mhm.
because it is a digital representation of someone's thoughts that is even frequently not even an actual experience, but a commentary on an experience. And that is like takes you farther and farther away. It is a paradox that people might search out meaning in social media only to feel more isolated,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So it's like lifting up your head. It's like seek the community table in a restaurant if you're entering it alone.
Yeah.
I travel a lot for the work that I do, about
Mhm.
50% of my time. And I am therefore removing myself from my own community to be in commune with others. And I'm an introvert.
Hmm.
So there's nothing necessarily, natural about the social aspect of community for me.
Mhm.
What is natural for me is to be in contact, not necessarily be in conversation, to acknowledge the person who is sitting next to me with a nod and with an eye contact, to stop when someone may be serving me in a restaurant,
Mhm.
right? To not treat the person who is going to clean up after me as a servant, right, in a hotel room.
Yeah.
To notice people that I am passing as I'm walking down the street is both for my contact as well as my safety,
Mm.
as well as my opportunity. Right? If I am to be of service, or if I am to notice that someone may need my support, if I am in need of support, I need to actually be in relationship to. Right? And so that there's these ways and means that effectively require us just to be with each other. You know, in the work context, say to people, uh, it you need critical mass, and critical mass starts with three. Yeah. It's like, don't try to organize some
Right.
big thing unless you
Yeah.
have three people at the center.
Yeah.
And with those three people, you want to not be in work
Mm.
mode. You want to be in relationship with them. You want to be able to know by the way in which they are looking at you that there is accord or not that they're hearing you,
Mhm.
right? Not that they're spouting the same things as you are. Is that the um, it's if you have not shared a meal with someone that you work with, how is it that you might know who it is that they are? Um, the Chinese have a saying. They say "yim cha." Uh, it's Yim cha is like sip tea, drink tea,
Mm.
and it says that how can we know each other unless we have actually even just drank tea with each other,
Mm.
right? Uh, Eating, breathing, uh, drinking water are essential to life. If you have not shared that moment with someone else,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Then people become concepts.
Mm.
So it's a very fundamentally, right, restitching that. Uh, it does require this interruption of habit, right?
Mhm.
The interruption of the technology habit, but
Mhm.
also the interruption of all the ways in which we've learned that if you happen to be listening and you are situated in a country called the United States, that this notion that we've learned that the American dream is about individual success,
Mhm.
right? And by the way, individual harm, right? And that we might even do our so-called collective work, uh, thinking of ourselves as individuals,
Mhm.
and that we may look to, therefore, that which we do in many aspects of containers, isolated from each other. The government being the only entity uh, that is responsibility for governance. So,
That's so great. I'm lost. I'm lost in your words, and what you're saying. Um, and I think what's really helpful for me, for people listening, is not taking this is a big, overwhelming ask. It's to start with what's simple and right in front of us. Acknowledging your neighbor, sipping tea, those little things that people can really start with to move like out of isolation or individualism into something that's a little bit more collective. And I think that's really a helpful, very practical way of beginning, because I think for some people it's really hard to even think about, how do I begin? How do I start? How do I change this thing called habits, which you spend a chapter talking about. I think what I really appreciate about your book is there's a real like practicality to how to get to the far horizon, how to sort of remember what we need to build when you're talking about habits or strategy or choice or practice. So I'm wondering if you could walk us through that a little bit, like this sort of way that you walk it through in the book, just kind of how we move from the habits to the practice to the strategy.
Ah, so there's this way in which my teacher talked about habits that I have found to be very useful, which is that a habit is strictly a repetitive action that occurs unconsciously. And we're just, as humans, on a behavioral basis, we pick those up early and we just keep accumulating them, right? And they're just unconscious things. Right? So your partner is likely to know more about your habits than you are. They're so unconscious, right? Your partner is likely to be able to rattle them off, and your partner will start with those habits that irritate your partner,
Hmm.
right? They'll know them intimately. That's how unconscious they are,
Mhm.
but how influential they are in who it is that you are. And from a Zen perspective, the practice of Zen is to interrupt those habit patterns
Mm.
until you return to the conscious state of who it is that you are
Mm.
without those habits. Okay, that's how I've come to know what the Zen practice is about. So for people who are not engaged in a practice like that, to know that there are habits that you have counted on, and there are habits that are standing in your way.
Mhm.
And the habits that you're counting on, although they have served you, are not serving you as well as they could because they're unconscious. So I don't remember if I used this example in the book or not, but the
Mhm.
one that I use frequently when I'm in front of people is, most people who in modern America, but not all, will brush their teeth at least once a day.
Mhm.
Okay. Uh, but what dentists will say, and remembering that many people don't go to a dentist regularly,
Mhm.
but those who do go to a dentist have a habit pattern about going to a dentist. And they'll say that those people, among those people, about 85% of them will actually be habitually brushing their teeth in an unhelpful way.
Mhm.
Okay?
Mhm.
So they do it once a day, but they only brush certain portions of their mouth and they neglect other portions of their mouth. And on a behavioral basis, they will do it for a particular set of time, almost down to like 5 seconds. So unconscious but habitual, it might be. But that might be 5 seconds too few, it might be 5 minutes too few. Okay. And then to try to break that habit, it becomes very difficult. Okay? Right? So it's like it's this patterns of behavior, and to identify those becomes important. And the way these habits work is once you begin interrupting a habit pattern, it gives you an opening to interrupt others. So I say start with the practical. Right? Are you hydrating properly every day? Or are you in a drought and drown situation? Do you interrupt someone as you're talking all the time? Can you pause instead? Do you leap to judgment? Is that something that you are known for? Okay. Pause before you make that leap. Interrupt the judgment you're saying to yourself because you actually haven't paused. It's still going on in your mind. Right? It's just not coming out of your mouth. How do you do that? To interrupt a habit, the most useful way is to return to the physical experience, which is to say, make sure that you're in your breath, make sure you're sitting or standing in your dignity, right? Make sure that you can feel the ground. To be grounded is not a state of mind, it is a state of the physical being. So if you happen to be a quadriplegic, what is really important is to find any part of your body that is in the lower extremity, wherever that might be, which might be in your butt, it might be somewhere higher than your butt, right? That you feel some aspect of something that is associated with that, right? So it is not about ableness. It is about being in as much physical experience as you can, right? To return to that, right? And that is the most powerful interrupter of any habit pattern. If you give yourself a moment to interrupt that, then to not replace one habit with another, but to bring practice in, right? The practice of hydration, for example, is very much at the beginning, something that might become a matter of paying attention in ways that are enjoyable. So don't do it in any old plastic cup. Pick something that does not have to be new and shiny, but is useful and cherishable. Something that you might care for, not dispose of. Okay. Have you noticed what your water tastes like? Have you been paying attention to that? Do you know the source of your water? Do you know whether that water is being cared for? Who's caring for that? Are you able to drink water because that water is arriving at your tap, having been diverted hundreds of miles from its source, thousands of miles from its source, and are other beings being deprived of that water in order for you to have that water? Which means that you should cherish that water. You should not waste it. You should pay attention to it. You should try to use some of your muscle to figure out, might there be ways for not so much water to be diverted? Can you do that in relationship to other people for whom that might be their primary lift? Can you add your lift to that? So it's tracing aspects of things back to source, not to a metaphoric source, but as far back as you can locate by your curiosity. your curiosity and your inquiry are really important in this moment. Not just your observation and your emotional response. Okay. Those are like threshold things. Observation and that you feel would mean that you're paying attention and you're human. But now to move into that place of agency, your curiosity is required. And you need not do that in your solitary existence. To do it even with one other thought partner would mean that you would be able to be in conversation with someone. And that conversation, it's not so much a study buddy as much as a conversation will help to move that inquiry from just your mind, right, into the public square of the two of you. Okay. And to be in a way in which you can move that along, and also know that at least one other person is having that same inquiry. So Sonya, an amazing thing for me that I would not have figured out if I hadn't written the book is that there are many, 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 many people who believe that they are the only one who is in thinking about certain things and is suffering right now because they are, or have a notion that they can do something but are not certain about that. And that is a phenomenon that exists in the world, and the only thing that keeps people isolated in that way, believing that they're only one, is that they haven't found another. Okay. So most of the rooms that I am in would feel like this room. Right? And the emergence of the moment is not about a book, right? It is very much about, for me, the hopeful aspect about that, right? Is this phenomena that cannot be named, right? Which is this awakening of humanity, right? And good for us that is the case. That is, so, there are different ways in which plants propagate. The most frequent way is through seeds. It isn't the only way. That a seed that stays underground too long remains dormant and then therefore cannot propagate.
I feel like I'm the beneficiary of like a private lesson with you. It's like just such a wonderful. I was thinking here, thinking, God, how did I get so lucky? It's really wonderful. And yeah, absolutely. I feel like the talking about the book is an excuse to talk about kind of the bigger thing, the bigger awakening, the time of transformation, the thing that we want to see, the thing that we need. Um, I had a burning kind of question for you come up while you were talking, which is,
Okay.
well, I think two things. One is I was curious about when you look around, like your environment, people that you're around, this community, your
Mhm.
community, or communities you travel to. What do you think, what are some of the most unhealthy habits that you see?
Oh, okay. Well, the most unhealthy habit
Yeah.
is that is uh, the habitual attraction that people have to their mobile devices.
Right. Yes.
Okay, which accentuate a isolation and which keep people basically in a spin of of uh, of their own conversation.
Mhm.
And so so we are in times that can only be called traumatic. Uh, and that doesn't matter where you are in the ideological spectrum, by the way. I, I believe it's traumatic across the ideological spectrum.
Mhm.
People's notion of what you do about that trauma is very different.
Mhm.
And that those differences will be about ideology, and also like belief systems, and also about what people's notion of reality is. Okay?
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
But trauma exists. And then we're effectively um, putting that trauma on a stove, lighting the
Mhm.
stove, okay, and keep on putting water into that pot
Mhm.
as it burns low. Okay, so we're aiding and abetting, which is to say the world is traumatic in of itself, and
Mhm.
that now and we are aiding and we're adding to our suffering.
Mhm.
Okay, and as we get into that state, as we move further and further into that state, we move further and further into our amygdala.
Mhm.
And science, recent science has shown that when the amygdala is fully lit up, the prefrontal cortex goes dark.
Mhm.
Literally on a physiological, neurological basis, we lose executive function.
Mhm.
Okay. And how can we expect to write a world that is turned over
Mhm.
without executive function?
Mhm.
Executive function meaning sharp, strategic decisions and actions that are followed through with commitment and awareness of the
Mhm.
changing conditions, and then shift again and shift again and shift again. And to do that with both strategy and compassion. How do we expect to do that if we are keeping ourselves in a state of trauma? Okay. So it's that you cannot divorce yourself
Mhm.
and not have any trauma at all. That the habit patterns of like adding fuel to that trauma is counterproductive to humanity. Right? So that is among the many habits that we might have. I'd say
Mhm.
that's I would name that because it's become an accelerator
Mhm.
and a magnifier, right? And it's a trauma accountability partner,
Mhm.
right? Am I not feeling bad enough today? Let me dial in just to make
Mhm.
sure.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
right. And so there's that. For myself, right, a 5-minute scan of the news uh, 3 times a day will tell me everything I need to know about what's happening.
Yeah.
I need not spend any more time
Mhm.
knowing what's happening. So this is not about disconnecting from what's happening. Okay. it's about putting yourself into the discipline, right, of how all of that information comes into you and what it is that you're going to be able to do something with,
Mhm.
right? Okay. And the more onslaught there is, the more discipline that you need.
Mm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Um, I had two directions of two different questions to go. Maybe we can do them both. When we were in the book and in what we're talking about, and also in the Indigenous worldview, this concept of relationship and practicing the cultivating a relationship is like of the utmost importance. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and just about
Yeah.
relationship. Yeah.
Sure. Um, so from what I have learned of your peoples and uh, the ways in which you have lived on a cultural basis, on a social cultural basis, that uh, the notion of community, family, extended family, right? Those are just you may have different words for them, but it's part of what when you know you are home, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you know you are home, it's when those relationships are there, and those relationships are intricate, which is to say that they intertwine, they're interwoven. Now, that may mean there's some pathology there too,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we will acknowledge, right, that can happen, especially with family. Right? There can be unhealthy ways in which relationships are, which is also part of the challenge of consciously being in a relationship. It is about continuously holding towards the thriving aspect of relationship and interrupting the aspects that can fall into trauma or disrepair.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not neutral in that regard, right? And the notion of it is to be in Hawaiian we have this word pilina, right? Pilina. Pilina is to be interwoven.
Mm.
When you have relationship that is interwoven, then you will not be able to be in transaction with that person,
Mm.
right? To us, like a threshold relationship is too shallow, right? It's like it's just a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
It's what can I get from this person, and so therefore, what do I minimally need to know about this person? What do they minimally need to know about me?
Mm-hmm.
How might I say it in the right way that they might be able to respond in kind? And if you build everything you do in that way, you are on less steady ground than a house of cards.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So to have at the core, even if it's a small number, the number of Pilina relationships I have are quite small,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the number of those. But because I have them, when I am in relationships, so for example, last night, there are two graduate students, two wonderful young women who I know are going to get their doctorates. When they were interviewing me, that we would have taken some time before we would be on stage together in a short time, in a concentrated way, to be able to have an aspect of interwovenness
Mm.
that we would be able to be in relationship as humans and humans in which we would understand that culturally these are two young people and I am someone with gray hair,
Mm-hmm.
and we would be able to not only inform be appropriate, but to be gently in relationship
Mhm.
and elder to younger people.
Mhm.
That these would be two young people, I would be so glad to be my descendants, even if I had just met them.
Mm.
And they would be so glad for me to be an elder that they can call upon.
Mm.
Okay. So that notion of taking that time, I will say to you that it is worth it.
Yeah.
In the most fractious campaigns that I have been in, what has allowed a bad situation to mend is if there would be people who would be able to call upon each other by virtue of interwoven relationship.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that makes so much sense. I think this sort of follows along this thread, is that I feel like when we're, um, as humans, when we're at our best, we are doing all these things. We are minding each other, we are loving each other, we're caring for each other, we're watching each other, we're tending to each other. Um, we're trying to build this thing, and I see it in my environment, I see it in my, community. And then I see quickly something happens and we can go to being at our worst. And at our worst, we're playing identity politics and the trauma Olympics and this kind of phenomena of cancel culture, and throwing people away, where we can really be bad to each other. Um, and I'm wondering, because I think there's so much striving towards this awakening. I think there's a lot of intention and desire and even practice that people try to cultivate,
Yes,
to this space. But then right at that edge, we also have this other thing or we fall back into this other thing. So,
yes, yes.
it's so alive,
Uh-huh.
you can probably tell by my energy. So I'm wondering
Yes.
what you
Yeah.
make of this, what you say to
Right.
this. How do we get out of this identity cancel
Yes.
culture politic?
So it's a speaking from my own experience, um, it can be jarring to get on a plane from Hawaii, which by virtue of, we are one of the states of the United States, but by virtue of our distance and by virtue of the fact that uh, the last time we had any people who were of one race who were in the majority is when they were Native Hawaiians. Okay, so we have never had a white majority in this place called Hawaii, which is one of the 50 states. And that has had its own way in which it has come into modernity as a result.
Mhm.
So I can get on a plane, and it's very jarring to get off a plane on the other side. And it's like I'm in a different world.
You are.
Okay, right? And I am, right?
Mhm.
Okay, and people will look at me differently than in Hawaii, where, by the way, we see each other, but we actually are not like overly obvious about our curiosity because there's nothing special about being the people who we are.
Mhm.
And therefore, we are all special,
Mm.
right? So, uh, but they're going to look at me differently when I step off the plane. The question is whether I will look at them differently, not whether or not they will look at me differently.
Mhm. Mm. Mhm.
Okay. So I can be, I can maintain my core by behaving in the same way as I would behave if I were home.
Mhm.
Okay. Now I know it's different territory, but no different than if I go to Waianae on the other side of the island, or if I go to Kailua on the other side of the island, or if I go to another island. I go to
Mhm.
Maui, or I go to the big island of Hawaii or Kauai,
Mhm.
right? Right? It's that to be in relationship with
Mhm.
people, to be observant of their ways, but not to change who it is that I am,
Mhm. Yeah.
the center of my values
Yeah.
and all of that. So, which is to say, it's a matrix moment.
Mhm.
And I choose the reality to be the one of interdependence, that is reality. And the world that is a delusion is the one that is not.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
And if I am interdependent with people who are choosing not to be interdependent with me,
Mhm.
right, I will at least be able to navigate that ground with less harm.
Mhm.
Okay. Right. I might not be seen as powerful by them,
Mhm.
but their view of me does not define who it is that I am. I am not subject to their affirmation. And so therefore, why would I be subject to their de-affirmation?
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that requires having a place to return to,
Mhm.
which is why even though I do a lot of work outside of Hawaii, I choose to commute home.
Yeah.
But a thing that has happened is that by doing work elsewhere, that we are able to actually create small communities of people, by the way, who have never lived in Hawaii,
Mhm.
who are earnestly practicing being in interdependence with each other.
Mhm.
And that's how we are. If bad viruses can infect the world, good viruses should be able to do so as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. We're going to transition to a Q&A soon. So I wanted to ask you a question, one more question, which is there something that I haven't asked you that you want to talk about that you're like, oh, I really wanted to talk about this?
Oh, gee, I am so engrossed by the arc
Yeah.
of your your questions and our
Mhm.
conversation, Sonia,
Yeah.
that nothing has been left unsaid.
Hmm. That's
So
great. Yeah, I
thank you so
appreciate that.
much.
Yeah. We can only go as far as where our conversation is supposed to go. Um,
That's
so I really appreciate that. And so I'm gonna start reading some of the questions that are in the Q&A so that we really open this up to all of the beings that are out there that have things that they want to ask you about, not just
okay.
you. I feel like I have to open the doors to the classroom. Um, so this is a question that is from Anonymous. What does a typical day look like for you? How do you orient to the horizon, parentheses, keeping the long range, 7 generation big picture view, while also navigating the day to day churn of tasks, work, chores, obligations, and news that can so easily keep us in a small view? What a great question.
Okay.
Yeah,
I do not. Well, first of all, and I'm. I guess we are on YouTube. Is that correct? So
I
some
guess
people can't see us.
I
Is
guess
that
so.
true? Okay. So, this is my phone. I hope you can see it.
Is it a
It's a
flip
flip.
phone?
It's a
Mhm,
flip phone.
mhm.
Okay. It's a flip phone. It's a flip phone intentionally because I'm going to use the phone to to receive calls. And oh, by the way, I can text, right? But yes will be 999-337777, right? So I can text. I can do two modes of communication. But this is purposeful, right? Because connection to me needs to be purposeful.
Mhm.
And that means I will put off being attached to a news feed until I have done certain things in the morning.
Mm.
I get up very early, frequently before the sun has risen. And I get up and I stretch as one of the first things that I do. Nothing that looks formulaic. I mean, it's like a human version of a cat or a dog. And I tend to the washing of my face and the brushing of my teeth and, and the plumbing. I tend to those things. I change my clothes so that I'm not in my sleeping clothes as soon as possible so that I do not remain in that clothing. And also so that when I'm wearing that clothing, I am resting. Right? So I'm paying attention to that. I break my fast first by drinking water. And in Hawaii, we are so blessed to be able to get good water right out of the tap. And so therefore I get it right out of the tap and I drink that water. I'm also working on a policy and community basis to keep that water so blessed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And that is work that I do. So it won't be, there will at least be an hour from the time that I rise to the time that I will look at email, right? And I'll look at the newsfeed. Okay. And newsfeed, when, especially in moments like this, when it is coming at a very rapid fire, and it is about rapid and about fire, that I am going to incline actually scan it. I don't want to be a sponge to absorb the harm that is also coming through.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to observe it from the view plane of a hill where I can see everything from a hillside, but not be embedded in it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. I'm going to do that. Okay. I have my schedule with respect to what's going to happen in the day. I have it on paper. There is a schedule for other people who work with me that is electronic, who can see that, who can be in relationship to that. But mine is on paper
Mm-hmm.
so that I can see the spatial relationship
Mm-hmm.
of these things
Mm-hmm.
and spatial relationship as they span not only the day, but the weeks, the months, and sometimes the years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. I tend to my food and I do most of my own cooking. Okay. And because I have practiced this, it doesn't take up a lot of my time. But the cooking moment also allows for me to be in my physical body, and therefore there are many things that may be resolved by my being in my physical body rather than in churning in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. We think that we're only thinking when we're thinking. But when we're thinking, what we're doing is we're in a churn, right? Versus in that place of reflection where all the things that, all the data
Mm-hmm.
gets to settle and a sense making emerges. Right? I try very hard to be in conversation with an actual human every day,
Nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
not a text string,
Mm-hmm.
not an email, okay,
Yeah.
but with at least one other human every day, okay, every single day, whether it's a human that I'm in close pilina with or not, right? But I know that that is a practice that will atrophy if I do not come in every day. It's like kindness is cannot be a concept, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to be able to be kind in hard places. in order for the hardness to be received well. And that takes practice, right? And it takes interruption. I tend to my rest because my rest is required for me to be at full capacity as a human, because it's actually my humanness that people are counting on me for. If some policymaker wants me to be a strategy partner, I cannot be strung out and too tired to offer the best sharp strategy to that policymaker. I can't have used up all my juice. So tending to my juice is like you putting oil in your car or air in your tires if you drive. So most people tend to their car better than to themselves, and then they wonder why they've burned out. Okay. So it's a little snapshot.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I have a couple more questions here. So this question is from Cecilia. Where does non-dualistic thinking, living fit into going beyond crisis? How does more mystical thinking and speaking, and how about more mystical thinking, speaking, and daily practices?
Okay. So a way in which we think of, that some people might think of as mystical thinking, we would say is, isn't it a shame that as humans, that we would say, if you're in relationship to the earth, if you're in relationship to ancestors, if you speak with descendants, if you do that, that you would be considered a mystic, rather than just in relationship to the universe as it exists,
Right.
but so you're only like accessing a portion of the universe. Right? And so in the practices that I come from, we try not to call it mysticism or magic, because then it places it in a binary.
Right.
With like, okay, the real world and then the mystic world. No, we consider all of it to be the real world.
Yeah.
It's just that there's a world that some people can access and a world that other people have access to. Okay. Um, uh, you have to move out of the binary on everything, including the notion that you are always right, right, and your opposition is always wrong, right? So, an advice that my teacher gave me very early in my career as a political operative is that if you sift through the rubbish of your fiercest critic, you will find the kernels of truth that will show you what it is that you need to interrupt, and also what is the way forward to bring that opposition to your side. Okay? All right? Okay. Which is to say that truth is not a black and white thing. To see the whole truth, you have to actually see it from the many angles that are not available to you just through your own eyes and your own experience. Right? And so you have to move beyond the dualism that you've learned. I think children are not as dualistic as adults.
Yeah, that's so true. The next question is from Laura. In the United States, we're so polarized to the point of being right. Of being right is the ultimate goal, as Norma mentioned. What are other ways we can begin to untangle some of this narrative to lead to a more collective state?
So I believe that part of the polarization is because the universe is in active suffering right now, which is to say, whether you believe in climate change or not, the universe is in this tumultuous moment in its history, of which is, millions of years, right, in the making. And we're just in one of those stages of tumultuousness. We've gone through this before. And when that happens, humans will not know how to cope with that. And we evolve slower than other non-human beings when there's these big climatic shifts. Okay. The ants run before the storm hits. Okay. We don't. Okay. So our evolution is slower. And so a big part of this polarization is fear. And that fear can occur on any part of the ideology. And if you think of ideology as a set of ways in which people believe a world works or doesn't work, and what values are at the center of that, then when you're in a trauma response, you will retreat into that. You retreat to that place where you're certain. This is why the center is having such difficulty, because the center actually does not have as much of a righteous view about their beliefs. Okay. And so, ironically, they cannot tip the ballast between the two sides who believe that they are absolutely right. Okay. Now, if you're absolutely right, whether you're on the left or the right, among other things, you're not going to be able to convince the other that that is so. So some group of peoples are going to have to, in my view, are going to have to go about the work of creating the possible that will make it possible for people to see a lived reality, not a conceptual reality, not a theoretical reality, not even a constitutional reality, that they're able to see and tangibly feel that their existence and way of living can be in the Hawaiian word would be pono, can be in right relationship. Okay?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so that is work that has to occur. Okay. If you're tearing down the institution that is that has been created to respond to an emergency, then the peoples have to have other ways of responding to an emergency. And that is work.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. We have 3 more questions. I hope that's okay with you. And I think
We'll
about
try
10
for shorter responses.
Yeah, no. I mean, or don't, and it will be what it is.
Okay.
I think many of your questions are answering the questions or responding to some of the questions that are coming. Excuse me. And this question is from Tanya. How do we think about wanting to help and heal the world, but also doing what we can within our own circles and communities? I feel like when I stay in my relationships and communities, I'm not doing enough.
Okay. So first you have to interrupt the notion. I don't know, because I don't know what Tanya's specific circumstances are, whether or not the not doing enough is a true assessment or not. Okay, right? I would say it's a 50-50 proposition, is my experience. For some people, it is about you're not doing enough because you're staying in your own circle and you're indulging in that. And for 50% of the people, when they ask that question, that not doing enough is totally a question of guilt and misspent guilt, as if you are a superhuman, right? Okay. And I would say if you're a superhuman and you want to do more, you have to clear your plate because you can only put so much on your plate. So if you have a desire to do more, you have to do less to do more.
Yeah.
You have to do fewer things, and you have to do the fewer things with more time, with more intentionality, with more focus, with more people. Okay. And that would be a way to expand your circle. So there's also the aspect of who is it, who are the we? Is the we is a small circle of people, or is the we an expanding group of people? So if there is expansion, even if that expansion is slow, you're moving in the right direction. And then it's all a matter of specifics. You have to get out of the theoretical, and I will also be unable to respond unless you get out of the theoretical.
Yeah. This next question is from Rachel. Since individualism trains people to only think of themselves and to think of everything in terms of how it benefits them, how do we get/invite people to question this individualism when they don't want to? How do we get them to see they need community?
Okay. So first of all, you cannot. I would just say flat out,
Yeah.
you cannot. But I would say that there are many people who are curious. And among the curious would be people who understand the problem, but don't know how to get out of the frame. And that's where I see the most useful work would be to be in practice with people who are trying to figure out how to get out of that frame and be in practice with them so that you can build the muscle for many, many, many ways, both practical and work-wise and personal living-wise, and all the many ways where you could get, you could get a tangible notion of what a collective community can be, and then where people can have agency in that. So you don't lose your individual agency when you come into collective work. People don't think of collectiveness as being in a binary with individualism. Okay? When you do that, you're also not giving the fullness of the work that needs to occur.
How do you think, this is just my sidebar question, how do you think that curiosity shows up when you said there are people who are curious about being in community?
So when people ask questions about, it's like when they when they have a critique of what's going on, and they, even if they don't name it in the same words that you have learned it as a frame, you can understand that they're talking about things like, so for example, they would say things like, yeah, like if only we had less greed, right? They might use that word, okay? Or they might say, why are people just looking out for themselves? Okay. Or
somebody wants to be invited in.
someone's being invited in, right? Or somebody basically says, I want to be helpful. How can I do that appropriately? Which means that they understand they're not part of that community, but they want to figure out how to be in relationship to them. Now you can give them a transactional answer. Go to this GoFundMe page. Right? Or you could begin, right, the conversation that would have a more lasting and durable way where they could become part of the circle.
Yeah, that makes sense. Our last question, which is a really fun one from Sterling, is what role does play have in our lives?
Haha. Okay. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, okay, so it's at um the so play is plays two roles. One is without play, there can be no creative juice. Okay. And the other is it is respite that we have agency in. Okay. All right. And so
Mhm.
therefore it should be done without guilt.
Mhm.
All
Nice.
right. Okay. And, I have my own secret aspects of play that because I'm an introvert, only a small number of people know about. Right? Okay. I won't name them because they're also introverts, but for many, many years now, the three of us will celebrate my birthday by going out to a favorite place to eat, and then we don't talk very much, and we're all happy, and we are at play because we do not have to perform in any particular way with each other. And we're enjoying ourselves, and we wear what we want, and we're eating the things that we love,
Mhm.
that are lovingly prepared, right? Okay. So play, right? Do not bypass that. And if you have to schedule it, do so to remind yourself that within you, no matter what age you are, is a child that needs to be nurtured,
Mhm.
or no children will follow us.
Mhm. Yeah, that's wonderful. What a wonderful way to sort of end. We're coming to our end. So I just wanted to just ask if, well, first of all, thank you for this incredibly rich, very intimate conversation. Um, and just to see if you have any closing thoughts that you want to share.
I hadn't planned on this, Sonia, so I will
Mhm.
reveal that I hadn't planned on it. But recently I found a poem that I wrote in 2017
Mhm.
that I thought that I made a copy of, and I put it in my book because it spoke to me again, and I would like to share it.
Please, yeah.
And I do this with you and the humans on this call that I do not have the privilege of seeing.
Mm.
It's called ha'a, and ha'a in Hawaiian means humility.
Mm.
Okay. Where some bask in the glow, there is only ha'a, welling and threatening to spill over. Who can know for certainty that good will arise? Certainly not I, just a wandering monk, stopping from time to time and drawn to breath. To commune in the fields where people labor, the determined, the fearful, the fiercely good-hearted. These people, my friends, my relatives, becoming human beings and struggling to be strong and free. For there are no certainties, of this I am certain. Only the shugyo of hana, discipline of work, a well-worn path and friend to clear the rubbish of unworthy thoughts. Only summer's heat after bracingly cold spring that bloomed suddenly at the end of a too dark winter, careening upon when fall's dreams were not looking past the relief of summer's heat.
Mm.
Of this the universe is certain. The deep knowing, the certainty that across the chasm of our fears, our doubts, our suspicions, and our glorious delusions, across the crevasse await all who dare believe, waiting. So when a smile, a tear, nay, a flood of gratitude and love in hopeful embrace and yearning for all that may be, can be, will be, knowing into the unknown. We must not fail to act for fear that we may fail. When the rain falls and meets the enduring wind, that is the wandering monk. Only ha'aha and sacred kuleana, sacred responsibility. Sit. I, Maupopo, yes, understood. Thank you so much, Sonya.
Thank you so much, Norma.
I was afraid of being in this space where I would only see one other being, but having one other being counted. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah. Have a beautiful evening. Yeah.